I was hired to carry one language across that table. The men sitting across from the most dangerous don in the city never knew I spoke three. So when they leaned back in their chairs, comfortable, certain, and began, in a language they were absolutely sure no one in that room understood, to calmly decide which of them would put the bullet in Don Orsini before the month was out, and which of them would take his little girl as the thing that kept his people in line afterward. I was the only person at that long table who heard a murder being planned, and a child being sold. I heard it in the soft, rolling, beautiful language of the mountains, the language I had learned years before, sitting beside frightened people in a refugee clinic, holding their words in my mouth so a doctor could understand them. The most beautiful language I know, and these men were using it to schedule a killing, 2 feet from my face, because they had taken one look at me, the fat interpreter the agency sent, soft and round and harmless. She does English, she does Italian, she's the help, and decided I was a piece of the furniture that happened to talk, and I had to keep smiling. That is the part I need you to understand before any of the rest of it. I had to keep my face perfectly, professionally smooth, and keep translating the polite English version of the meeting. The families look forward to a long and profitable understanding, out loud, in my warm, clear voice, with a real murder being arranged in my other ear, in a language I wasn't supposed to have. Because the second my face changed, the second one flicker crossed it, they would know. And men who will kill a Don do not leave a witness who understood them sitting at the table afterward. I have held a lot of difficult words in my mouth in my life. I have translated a diagnosis to a mother. I have carried a man's last sentence across a language to his daughter. But I have never before or since had to hold my own face still while 2 rooms worth of meaning ran through me at once. The lie I was saying out loud, and the death I was hearing underneath it, and decide in real time with no safe move anywhere on the board, what a person like me was supposed to do with the truth when she was the only one in the world who could hear it. But I'm getting ahead of the words. And in my work, that's the one sin you can't take back. You carry them across in order. Exactly. Or you change everything. Let me go back. Let me tell you who I am, and how the fat interpreter nobody looked at twice ended up the only person at the most dangerous table in the city who knew what was actually being said. Before I take you back to that table, one thing, and I mean it. If you have ever been the person they spoke freely in front of because they decided you didn't matter, the help, the assistant, the one in the corner, they never lowered their voice around because they'd already filed you under no one, then tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Just your city, and the thing about you they never bothered to find out. I read every single one. Because this is a story about exactly that. About the day the person everyone had decided was no one turned out to be the only one in the room who understood what was really happening. And I want you to decide something now before you know how it ends. I'm sitting at that table with a murder in my ear, and a smile on my face, and I have 2 choices and they are both terrible. I can say it. I can find a way to warn a dangerous man that his own house is about to kill him, which means revealing that I understood every secret word, which means becoming a witness that the killers cannot allow to keep breathing. Or I can let it pass. I can finish the job I was hired for, translate the polite lies, collect my fee, and walk out alive. Because it is not my family, and they are not my people, and no one would ever know I heard a thing. Decide right now what you'd do. Comment say it, Steve, if you'd find a way to warn him, or let it pass, if you'd keep your face smooth and save your own life. Lock it in. I'll ask you again at the end. My name is Vera Costa, and I carry words across for a living from one language into another, exactly without adding to them or taking from them, which is a far stranger and harder thing than people think it is. Let me tell you what an interpreter actually is, because the world has it wrong. An interpreter is not a person who knows words. A dictionary knows words. An interpreter is a person who can hold 2 entire worlds in her head at the same time and pass meaning between them without spilling a drop, who can hear a thing in one language and feel instantly the shape it has to take in another so that the heart of it survives the crossing. It is the most invisible, skilled work there is. When I do it perfectly, you forget I'm there at all. 2 people who could not otherwise understand a single thing about each other, look into each other's eyes and feel understood, and they never once think about the woman in the middle who is doing the actual understanding, who is carrying the whole bridge on her back so they can walk across it and never look down. I am very, very good at being the bridge nobody looks at. It turned out to be the most dangerous skill a person could possibly have in the one room where everybody was sure I was only furniture. And I'm a big woman. Plus size, fat, soft, your English is so good. Where are you really from? The whole tired song. And I came up multilingual in a crowded port city neighborhood where 6 languages crossed at every corner. And I'll tell you the strange thing my body does in my line of work. People decide looking at me that I am simple, comfortable, limited. A large, soft, harmless woman who surely manages only the obvious languages, the ones that match the face they've already sorted me into. And so they relax, they speak freely. They lower their guard and raise their voices in the tongues they're certain I couldn't possibly hold, and I have stood in 100 rooms and quietly understood every word that wasn't meant for me and said nothing, because the first rule of my work is the same as the last. You carry across only what you're asked to carry. The rest you hold. My size made people careless around me. Careless, it turns out, is a thing you cannot afford to be around a woman who is actually listening. I didn't always work the rooms I work now. For years, I did the work that made me. Hospital interpreting, court interpreting, and the work I loved most and was paid least for, a refugee clinic down by the water, where I sat beside people who had lost everything and held their words gently in my mouth, so that a doctor, a lawyer, a judge could finally hear them. That clinic is where I learned the language that this whole story turns on, the soft, rolling language of a mountain country far from here. The language of 100 frightened, brave, gentle people I helped across the worst year of their lives. I learned it out of love, basically. I learned it to be useful to people no one else would listen to. I want you to hold on to that because of what these other men, years later, used that same beautiful language to plan, and because of the little girl, 2 years motherless, who had no one left in the whole world who could speak it back to her. A summit between two powers who do not share a language needs a third voice in the room, someone neutral, professional, bound to carry the words across faithfully and to forget them the moment the meeting ends. That is a real profession, and I am good at it. And that is how, on a gray afternoon, an agency I'd worked with for years sent me up behind the walls of the Orsini estate to be the neutral voice between Don Stefano Orsini and a man named Dragan Vasic, whose syndicate had come a very long way to sit at his table. I knew the rules before I arrived. I would carry English between the two sides, the common ground, the language of the deal. I was not told, because no one thought it mattered, that Vasic's people spoke among themselves in the language of the mountains. Why would it matter? The Orsini family certainly didn't speak it. Their Don's wife had. Once I'd learn this within the hour. And it would break my heart and then save a life. But she had been dead 2 years, and with her had died the only voice in that house that understood the tongue. The dangerous guests were about to feel so safe speaking in front of everyone. The Orsini estate was beautiful and grieving, the way a great house is when the woman who made it a home is gone from it. A consigliere met me, an older, careful man, and before he would let me near the table, he tested me, the way that world tests everyone, except it came as a quiet question with a great deal resting on it. You understand what you are, he said. You are a mouth, not an ear. You carry what is said across this table and you carry it nowhere else, not out that door, not to a soul, not ever. The agency vouches for your discretion. I am asking you myself, what do you do with what you hear in this house? Slovo. Let it breathe. I met his eyes and I told him the truth of my whole profession, the creed I have lived by in every room from the clinic to this one. I don't add and I don't subtract, I said. I carry the words across exactly what was said, the way it was meant, no more and no less. That is the entire job, and I have never once broken it. And the harder half, the half no one ever thanks you for, is this. I hear a great deal that I am not asked to carry. Everyone does in my work. A good interpreter hears everything and lets nothing show on her face, and takes none of it out the door. You are worried I'll repeat what I'm given to translate? I never have. But understand what you're actually trusting me with, sir. It was never only the words you hand me. It's all the others too. The ones people say when they've decided the interpreter isn't really there. I held his gaze a beat longer than was comfortable. I'm always really there. Remember that, and we'll have no trouble. The old man looked at me for a long moment, and something in his careful face shifted, respect, and a flicker of something warier, and he nodded and he brought me to the table. He did not understand yet how much I had just told him. Neither did I. I thought I was describing my ethics. I was describing the hinge the whole night would turn on. That the fat interpreter they were all about to speak so freely around was, in fact, always really there. And then they brought in Dragan Vasic and his men. And they sat down across from the most dangerous man in the city. And within 10 minutes one of them said something low to another, in the soft rolling language of the mountains, certain it would die in the air between them. And I, pouring my own water with a perfectly smooth face, understood every single word. and the words were about a funeral that hadn't happened yet. I want to take you inside the next 2 hours the way I lived them, because it is the strangest and most frightening thing I have ever done, and there was not a single moment of it that looked like anything from the outside. From the outside I was excellent. Calm, warm, precise, the neutral voice carrying English across the table in my clear professional way. The Orsini family welcomes the spirit of cooperation. Mr. Vasic proposes the following terms. From the inside I was in 2 rooms at once and only one of them was the polite one. Because all through the careful English deal-making, Vasic's men kept murmuring to each other in the mountain tongue. About me sometimes, idle and ugly, the kind of thing men say about a woman's body when they're certain she can't understand. And I carried that across my own face like it was weather. But mostly about the plan, and piece by piece, in fragments I had to assemble while smiling and translating something else entirely. I learned the whole shape of it. They were not here to make a deal. They were here to make a funeral look like a deal. They would sign Orsini's understanding today, all warmth and wine. And within the month, Don Stefano Orsini would die. An accident, something clean, something that would not start a war because it would not look like one. And in the chaos after, while the Orsini people were leaderless and grieving, Vasic's syndicate would step in as partners, as friends of the family in a hard time, and to keep the Don's loyal men from making trouble, they would take the one thing those men would never risk, the Don's daughter. A motherless, 7-year-old. They said her name in that beautiful language like she was a line item. They had thought about where they'd keep her. And here is the detail that turned my blood to water. The fragment I caught and almost couldn't hold my face around. The whole thing only worked because they had a man inside. Someone in Orsini's own house had arranged this summit, had vouched for its safety, would help stage the accident, would point the way to the child when the time came. They didn't say his name in front of me. Even careless men don't say the inside man's name out loud, but they referred to him, twice, with a little laugh, as the one who found the interpreter, the man who had hired me. Which meant the traitor sitting somewhere in this grieving house was the same man who had looked at me and seen the perfect harmless furniture, the soft fat woman who'd carry the polite words and never understand the real ones. He had brought me in because he was sure I was no one. He had handed me the entire plot by accident, in a language he was certain I couldn't speak, because his whole plan depended on me being exactly as small as he'd decided I was. I translated Mr. Vasic looks forward to a long friendship in my warm, clear voice, and I smiled, and inside the other room I was screaming. When they broke for the afternoon, I asked for the washroom, and a housekeeper walked me down a long, quiet hall. And that is where the second half of this story found me, because a door was open, and in the room beyond it, alone on the floor by a window, was a little girl, Mila Orsini, the Don's daughter, 7 years old, and so still, so folded in, that she barely seemed to take up the small space she occupied. A child who had gone quiet in the particular way children go quiet when the one person who understood them has died. I'd hear the rest later. That her mother, Anna, the Don's wife, had come from those same mountains, had spoken that same soft language, had filled this grieving house with it for years, and that when she died, 2 years ago, the language had died out of the house with her, because no one else spoke it, and little Mila, who had learned the world in her mother's tongue, had slowly stopped speaking at all. There was no one left to answer her. I stopped in the doorway, and Mila, not looking up, murmured something to herself, a small, private sing-song phrase, the kind a child says to a toy, in the language of the mountains, her mother's language. The same beautiful language I had just spent 2 hours hearing used to plan her kidnapping. And without deciding to, gently, in that same tongue, I answered her. I only said a small thing. I said, "That's a good song. My friend at the clinic used to sing it to her little one." And Mila Orsini's head came up off her knees, and she looked at me, at the fat interpreter the dangerous men had decided was furniture, with the most astonished, wide-open, starving expression I have ever seen on a human face, because for the first time in 2 years, someone in her own house had spoken to her in her mother's voice. She scrambled up off the floor and she crossed that room, and she did not stop until she had taken hold of 2 of my fingers, and she said, in the mountain tongue, in a rush, like a dam giving way, "You can hear me? I can hear you," I said, in her mother's language, and I had to kneel down fast so she wouldn't see my face do the thing it had refused to do for 2 hours at that table. "I can hear you, little one, I hear you perfectly. So now you understand the trap I was truly in, because it was not the simple one. The simple version is the one you've been weighing since the start. Warn the Dawn, and become a witness the killers will erase, or stay silent, finish the job and walk out alive. And that was real, and it was bad enough. But sitting on the floor of that little girl's room with her 2 fingers gripped in my hand, I understood the trap had a second floor, and it was worse. Because the inside man, the traitor, the one who'd hired me precisely because he was sure I was nobody, was somewhere in this house, trusted, believed in a way I never could be. I was the fat interpreter the agency sent that morning. He was the Don's own man. If I walked up to Don Stefano Orsini and told him that his trusted insider was selling him to Vasic, that I knew because I'd understood the secret language no one knew I spoke, why on earth would a man like that believe me over his own blood? I had no proof. I had only my ears and my word, and a body that every powerful person in that house had already decided told them everything they needed to know about what I was worth. And if I was wrong about whether he'd believe me if I said it, and he didn't, then I had revealed myself to a house with a traitor in it and a syndicate of killers at the table, and I would not survive my own honesty. I'm going to be honest with you, the way I've been honest the whole way through. Sitting on that floor, I had nearly decided to let it pass. I had done the math the way you do it when you're frightened and it's not your fight. I could finish the summit. I could carry the polite lies across the table for one more session, smile, sign nothing of my own, collect my fee, and walk out the gate a living woman who happened to know a terrible thing about people who were no concern of mine. Don Orsini was a dangerous criminal. Whatever was coming for him, he had surely earned 100 times over. It was not my family, it was not my fight. No one would ever know that the fat interpreter had heard a single word. I could carry this too, the way I'd carried so much, held in my mouth, taken out no door. That is what my whole profession had trained me to do. Hear everything, reveal nothing, walk away clean. And then Mila Orsini, still holding my 2 fingers, looked up at me and said, in her mother's language, in the smallest voice, the thing that took the choice out of my hands, she said, "Don't go, you're the only one who can hear me. When you go, it'll be quiet again." And I thought about what those men at the table had decided to do with this child. I thought about a motherless little girl who had gone silent because the world stopped speaking her language, taken from the last house she had, by men who'd say her name like a line item, to be kept somewhere as a piece of leverage until she wasn't useful anymore. I thought about every frightened person I had ever sat beside in that clinic, the whole reason I had learned this beautiful language in the first place, to be useful to the people no one else would listen to, and I understood that I had spent my entire life being the one who hears the unheard, that it was in the most literal possible way the only thing I was for. You cannot learn a language out of love and then use your silence in it to let a child be taken. You just can't. I couldn't. So I stayed on that floor a moment longer, and I held a little girl's hand, and I made the decision the whole night had been walking me toward. I was going to find a way to say it. The only question left was how a woman that everyone in that house had decided was no one could possibly make the most dangerous man in the city believe her. Before the traitor in his house realized the furniture had been listening all along. I did not go to the Don. You don't when you have no proof and a body people have already decided not to trust. I went to the one man in that house who had looked at me that morning, like I might be a person, the consigliere, the careful old man who had tested me at the door. I found him alone in the hall between sessions, and I did the only thing I had. I gave him his own words back. "You told me," I said quietly, "to remember that I'm a mouth, not an ear. You were wrong about me, sir, and I need you to be brave enough to hear how. I'm always an ear. And I need 90 seconds. And then you can decide I'm a liar and have me thrown out the gate, but you will have heard it." And before he could stop me, I told him what Vasic's men had said at his master's own table, in the language no one in that house was supposed to understand, not the gist, the words, verbatim, the ugly specific ones, the funeral dressed as a deal, the daughter as the line item, the accident within the month. And then I gave him the one piece that turned it from a wild story into a key that fit a lock he already had. "And the man who arranged all of this from inside your house," I said, "the one feeding them, the one who will point the way to the child, they called him, twice, the one who found the interpreter. Sir, someone in this house requested me from the agency, by name, and vouched for me, and sat me at that table because he was certain I was harmless furniture who'd carry the polite words and never hear the real ones." I watched the old man's careful face. "Who hired me, because that is the name you're looking for." He told them exactly what I was. He was almost right. I have never watched a man's whole world rearrange itself so fast, and so silently. Because he knew who had hired me, it had a name, a man's name, a trusted man. And the moment the question was asked that way, the whole impossible accusation snapped into a shape he could not unsee because it explained a dozen small things he'd half noticed and swallowed. He did not take my word for it, not entirely, men like that don't. But he did the thing that mattered. He believed me enough to test it. And the test was simple, and it was cruel, and it was the kind of thing that world is very good at. He went to the dawn alone, and he said only that there might be a snake, and he watched the trusted man's face when the summit reconvened. And a guilty man who does not know how he's been caught makes 100 small mistakes when he suddenly feels the floor move. By the time we sat back down at that table, Don Stefano Orsini knew, not everything, but enough to be the most dangerous version of himself, the calm one. And then came the part I will remember until I die. Because the Don, now that he knew, did a thing of terrible elegance. He let the meeting go on. He let Vasic's men relax back into their certainty, into the comfort of the secret language, and he waited. And when one of them leaned over, easy and smug, and murmured to Dragan Vasic in the tongue of the mountains that the fat one translates well, we should book her for the wake, and chuckled, Don Orsini turned his dark eyes to me and gave me the smallest nod a man has ever given and handed me the room. Slow vo, let it breathe, I set down my water. I folded my hands, and I looked at Dragan Vasic, and I spoke to him, not in English, not the polite bridge I'd been hired to carry, but in his own soft, beautiful mountain language, the one he was so certain was a locked door. I said in his tongue clearly, so every one of his men heard the door come open. You have spoken very freely this afternoon. You did that because you looked at me, and you decided I was no one. I have understood every word you've said since you sat down. The funeral you are planning, the accident within the month, the child you discussed taking, and the room where you meant to keep her. And the man in this house who found you your harmless interpreter. I let that land in the dead, ringing silence. The Don understood all of it an hour ago from me, so, shall I keep translating, gentlemen? Or have we reached the end of what you'd like said out loud? I have been in a great many rooms. I have never heard one go that quiet. It is a specific silence. The silence of powerful men realizing that the one thing their entire plan depended on, that no one in the room could hear them, had been false from the first minute, because of the woman they were too lazy and too sure to look at twice. Vasic's face. The inside man's face, 3 seats down, going the color of ash as he understood that the furniture he'd hired had just narrated his death. I did not enjoy it. I want to tell you I'm above it. I'm not entirely, and I felt the want move in me like hot metal. But mostly what I felt, in that ringing silence with a frightened child 2 floors up, was the simplest and largest thing. I had been listening the whole time, and it was the most useful I have ever been. What the Orsini family did after with Dragan Vasic's collapsed summit and the man in their own house who had sold them is not a thing I watched, and not a thing I asked about, and I will not dress it up for you. No weapon was ever raised in any room I sat in. The deadliest thing that happened at that table was a soft woman folding her hands and answering in a language they were sure she didn't have. Some doors, once you've opened them, the people on the other side can close themselves. I expected when it was done to be paid and thanked and quietly disappeared. That is what usually becomes of the person who knows too much. Instead, Don Stefano Orsini did something I did not expect, which was that he asked me to stay for dinner, and at the dinner there was a 4th chair, a small one, because his daughter Mila refused to eat anywhere I was not. People ask, carefully, the way you ask about that name, what he is, away from the world that fears him. I'll only tell you this, he is a dangerous man, and I am not going to tell you a few translated sentences made him a gentle one. That would be a lie, and I don't deal in those. It's the whole of my profession not to. But he sat at the head of his grieving table and he watched his daughter speak, in a rush, in her mother's mountain tongue. 2 years of dammed-up words pouring out of a child everyone had given up as broken, to the fat interpreter who could finally answer her, and the most dangerous man in the city put his hand over his mouth and turned his face to the window, the way men do when they cannot let you see, because his wife's language had come back into his house in the mouth of a stranger, and his silent daughter had come back with it. He tried to keep me, of course. He offered me a place inside the wall, the family's voice protected, paid beyond counting, never small again. And I said the thing I'll say to you, because it's the whole of who I am. I'm not a possession, sir, not even a treasured one. I carry words across. I don't belong to the people I carry them for. There's a clinic by the water full of people no one else will listen to, and a court full of frightened people who need a true voice, and that is where my work is. But, and here I looked at Mila, who had not let go of my sleeve through an entire dinner. I will come for her, on my own days, as her friend, as the one who speaks her mother to her, until she has enough of the language back in her own mouth to never lose it again. That, you cannot pay me for. And I will never stop doing. Those are my terms. And the Don looked at me for a long moment, and then he inclined his head, the most dangerous man in the city, bowing it, a half-inch to the interpreter, and he said, "My wife always said the most powerful person in any room is the one who is truly listening. I spent 2 years thinking I'd lost the only one I'd ever meet." A pause. I was wrong, it seems. Thank you, Vera. I go up there still. Tuesdays mostly, and lately some Sundays with no reason offered. Mila talks now in 2 languages, switching between them like a little bridge herself, which is the most beautiful thing I have ever helped build. Her father sits with us and tries to learn the words his wife once filled the house with, and his accent is terrible, and his daughter laughs at him, and he lets her, because a man who fears nothing on this earth will happily be laughed at by a child who had forgotten how. I don't know what we are. I'm not in a hurry to find out. You learn in my work that some meanings can't be rushed across. You wait, and you carry them gently, and you let them arrive in their own language, in their own time. So now you know the whole of it, and I want to leave you with the thing I'd want left with me. Slow vo, let it breathe. The whole world looked at my body and decided, before I'd said a single word, which languages it could possibly hold sorted me, the way it sorts women who look like me, into simple, limited, harmless, no one. And every one of those men was wrong in the exact same lazy way, and it is the most useful mistake anyone has ever made about me. Because they confused the mouth for the work. The mouth is not the translator. The ear is the translator. The understanding is the translator. The quiet, unglamorous, unseen choice to actually hear another human being, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the size of the body doing it. They spoke freely in front of me because they were certain I couldn't understand. I understood everything. I always had. The person you've decided is no one is, very often the only one in the room who is truly listening. So here's my question, and I want your honest answer, not your church answer. And I want to know if it's the same one you locked in at the start, or if somewhere across that long table you changed your mind. You're the one they speak freely in front of because they decided you don't matter, and you've just heard them plan something terrible, and saying so could cost you everything while staying quiet keeps you safe and clean, and no one would ever know you understood a word. Would you have said it, or would you have let it pass? Tell me below and tell me if it's the answer you started with. I'll tell you mine one last time. Every safe instinct I had said, let it pass, hold it in your mouth, walk away clean, the way my whole profession had trained me to. A little girl asked me not to let it go quiet again, so I said it. The choosing is the only part of us that no one ever gets to decide for you. And if they ever spoke freely in front of you because they decided you were no one, drop your city and the thing about you they never bothered to learn. I rid everyone, in every language they send them in. That, after all, has always been the whole of what I'm for. Listen more than you speak. You'll be amazed what people say in front of someone they've decided not to see. Vera, the voice in the middle, I'm always really there.